Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. Thank you for joining me as we take a look at the astrological energies for the week of April 22nd to 28th. Now, this week we have Venus conjunct Uranus, Venus entering Gemini, we have the Sun squaring Pluto, we also have Uranus entering Gemini, a Mercury squaring Jupiter, and finally an air grand trine with Venus, Pluto, and the Moon. So a lot going on this week. Let's unpack all of that energy. So Venus has made her way through Aries and then Taurus, and there is a lot of independent, self-sufficient energy here. And now she moves into Gemini, which is more social and relational. But before she moves into Gemini, she gains some insight from Uranus at the last degree of Taurus. And this is something that she is closing out and moving on from. So Venus in Taurus is highly focused on the material experience. She likes good food, nature, fashion, and what you can enjoy through the five senses. She is consistent and stable and wants to feel comfortable. So Venus in Taurus does not like change and wants to stick with the status quo. But this energy long term can turn stagnant because there is not a lot of movement. So Earth is an element that requires air to stay healthy. Root systems rely on air in the soil in order to move nutrients and prevent the soil from becoming waterlogged and overly dense. So at the end of her journey through Taurus, Venus is receiving something from Uranus that helps her to see where movement is necessary, where she needs to allow things to change and flow in order to maintain a healthy foundation. So right before Venus makes her transition into the air sign of Gemini, something unexpected happens that disrupts the status quo here. And because it is in Taurus, this likely will show up in the material world. So this could be a sudden financial change or a shift in what you choose to spend your money on. This could be a sudden change in values or what you are drawn to. This could be a desire to change up your style or physical environment in some way. Uranus can disrupt the status quo and bring about an unexpected change here. So then on April 24th, Venus will enter into the sign of Gemini. And this is a very different energy than Venus in Taurus, because Venus in Gemini loves to explore information. She loves a good conversation. Venus in Gemini needs a lot of mental stimulation to keep the mind moving and active. So she is social, she's interactive and curious. So you can expect to feel more of these energies as she makes her way through this sign. And it's good to be mindful here because that Venus in Gemini can sometimes lose sight of the bigger goals and bigger picture to direct her energy toward, and her energy can get depleted quickly in juggling too many things at once. So it's important to be selective of what you choose to spend your time on that is ultimately supporting your larger goals. I'm seeing this as like a buffet, and let's say you want to try an assortment of Indian food, but you end up with a plate full of Mexican, Thai, and American food. So you can only now fit one item from India on your plate, and you end up not getting the experience that you set out for. So Venus and Gemini can agree to so many things that it can take time away from the goals she has set for herself. So instead of going through the buffet without a plan and just selecting all the items that look good, maybe go through the buffet and pick all the Indian food items you want first, and then go back through and add to your plate with the remaining room. So you still accomplish your goal of sampling various Indian food items, and you can satisfy your curiosity of other cultural foods without taking away from your overall goal. Now on April 25th, we have the Sun at 5 degrees of Taurus squaring Pluto at 5 degrees Aquarius. So the Sun in Taurus is where we gain our sense of self and our self-worth from the material world. It's where we hold material things close because they represent something that we haven't claimed in ourselves yet. So Taurus is opposite of Scorpio on the astrological wheel, and Scorpio is our internal power. So Taurus is the reflection of that in the material world. It's where the material world can hold power over us if we have not integrated what that reflection represents. Pluto, which is the modern ruler of Scorpio, sees what cages the soul, and he challenges it. So in a square aspect to that Sun in Taurus, Pluto is challenging where we are caging our own self-worth by placing it in material items, whether that's money or our physical body, what we own, what our status is, even what our values are. If we use the material realm to feel worthy, we are creating a prison for our soul, whose inherent worth is unlimited and far beyond anything that the material realm can hold. And this could be a vice that keeps us from understanding who we are at a deeper level and keeps our power outside of us. So Pluto will challenge that through Aquarius themes here of collective systems, technology, stripping power away from hierarchies, and challenging anything that is not authentic. Aquarius is all about what is unique for each individual, regardless of what anyone thinks. So if there is something you have been holding on to out of fear, or because it's popular or well liked, or maybe afraid of what others might think if you choose otherwise, that is caging your authentic expression, and Pluto will challenge that. And Pluto is the stronger force. We can work with Pluto or against, but he will win either way, because that is what is needed for our soul's growth and evolution. That is what is needed to free your energy and soul's own power in this lifetime. So depending on to what extent you are already working with Pluto, as he challenges the material realm with you, will determine on what octave this plays out. So if you are actively resisting change, digging your heels in, this square can be challenging. But if you are already working with Pluto to question and remain open and letting go of what is no longer working and integrating parts of yourself, this square can be more of a release point. So I would look to where you have Taurus and Aquarius in your chart by house, as Taurus is where you might be digging in your heels, so to speak, and Aquarius is what is challenging that. Specifically, if you have planets or points between 2 and 8 degrees of Aquarius or Taurus, this would be more prominent for you. This Sun-Pluto square is the theme of this week's Yin Yoga practice because this can be a challenging energy. So if you would like to explore this further, that is available through my website. Now, late on April 25th, we have Uranus re-enter into Gemini, where he will remain until 2032. So for the next 6 years, we can expect to see major innovations and changes in the way we communicate, travel, connect, receive, and share information. Uranus was in Gemini last year for a brief time, but the previous Uranus and Gemini cycle was between 1858 to 1866. And during this time period, the world saw massive changes to Gemini themes. There was the transatlantic telegraph cable that gave rise to instant communication. Newspapers and media took off with the mass sharing of information and perspectives. Travel changed with the expansion of railroads. Telegraphy became widely used with Morse code. And through these changes, the world became so much more connected than ever before. So the shadow side, this also was a period of duality, with wars and conflicts between old versus new ways of doing things and old versus new ways of thinking. So we have industrialization increasing, where machines were doing the work of people. We have at that time labor being replaced, and that deeply changed the way that humans connected to and transmitted their reality. So we have almost two realities existing at once. One is the traditional rural human labor experience, and the other is technological, it's more urban and machine assisted. So this is the duality of Gemini, and we are seeing this again now with the rise of AI. The way we communicated also became more abstract during industrialization. We were using numbers and symbols and codes rather than just plain spoken language. So it transformed the way we connect, the way we communicate and share information. You could say the world sort of like came online and became a shared global system. Now, industrialization meant we could send information on demand, and now we can generate it on demand. So industrialization gave abundance where there was scarcity. So information was no longer confined to a scribe or to a few select newspaper sources. Essentially, anyone could produce articles and print en masse. It became abundant and automated, and we are now seeing this trend again with AI making content generation abundant and automated. And there was an adjustment from what was considered real and human to generated and machine. So the first time around, Uranus automated physical labor, and this cycle, Uranus in Gemini seems to be automating cognitive labor. With Uranus and Gemini, time became compressed as we could now do so much more in far less time with the new technology. Information became abundant. We expanded our global network, and with that came that duality between the old and new, since there was such a sharp contrast. But also, because the change happened so abruptly with little planning for the transition, people were just thrown into the new system, replaced without a plan or any thought as to how someone would survive without being able to be paid for their labor. So it does make a difference in how we handle and navigate the change. Just as an example, let's say your boss comes in and has a big meeting with everyone and says, unfortunately, you are all being let go today as we have now bought machines to now do all of your work. Please clear out your workspace and good luck. That's a pretty awful experience. Contrast that with your boss coming in and having a meeting with everyone and saying, we have purchased machines to now do all of your work, and it's going to make your job a lot easier. What we're going to do is we are going to retrain everyone over the next 6 months to work with these machines and to add value in a whole new way where you get to be more creative, you have less physical and cognitive demands, and you get to spend your time learning and creating, and we will be adjusting to this new system together. That's a totally different experience. So, depending how consciously and mindfully we can work with the transition, work with changes, makes a huge difference in how it's received and how we're able to navigate that. Now, back in 1858 to 1866, when Uranus was previously in Gemini, Pluto was also in Taurus that time. So the power was tied to resources, and who controlled the resources basically controlled the power. So land, property, food, physical assets, etc. So that meant like railroads, factories, mines, agriculture. And Pluto in Taurus wants stable, trusted power sources with the mindset that less is more. So power would be consolidated into a few hands, like the banks, large organizations, landowners, and sources that are slow moving and hard to budge, right? They don't change. And maybe this is necessary at the lower octaves of experience, where individuals have not evolved to a state of self-authority and integrity. There is still a lot of fear and survival consciousness that might make something like that necessary. But this time around, humans are more evolved, and Pluto is now in Aquarius during this cycle's Uranus and Gemini. So where Taurus concentrates power, Aquarius distributes it. So it's now our connective systems that hold power. There is power in numbers, in ideas, and in how information is shared and distributed. So if Taurus is like the power of the bull, which would be like one single large immovable entity, Aquarius would be like the power of bacteria, where bacteria can absolutely disrupt the bull through its numbers. So bacteria also rely on much more simple concepts like move toward what is beneficial and away from what is not. And if all the bacteria are simultaneously following this one simple directive, they colonize. And it's not defining what the good or bad is. Each bacteria feels that within its own experience and is following what is good to it. And that in turn helps the collective. So that looks different for each individual. But the very simple concept of simply move toward what feels helpful and away from what feels harmful is all that is required. And that simplicity builds a self-organizing system. So this will play out differently this time around, but we can help achieve the highest outcome by working with these changes and the changes to come with Uranus and Gemini this time around more consciously and mindfully. So rather than seeing people as a job title that just gets replaced, maybe we can see people as evolving in their roles, since access to education and information is becoming so abundant. We aren't hiring one person for one task anymore. We can hire a person who can work with AI and evolve in their contributions over time. That might be an example of how we could work with it rather than just having a job title. You are yourself and your role evolves over time. So people would be hired for the long term and get to learn and evolve over time as you are not confined to your title. So I think it's important we resist the urge to centralize network power by making the networks open source so that we aren't falling into the shadow side of this expression, and consciously working with the higher expression. And the more that we share and decentralize, the higher the expression and the outcome will be. And also to see if we can integrate the duality rather than create conflict over sides, over old versus new. So then we have Mercury at 18 degrees of Aries, square Jupiter at 18 degrees of Cancer on April 26th. Now, Mercury in Aries is quite self-focused. It is focused on its own experience and relating everything back to its immediate personal experience. And it can take things personally. It is quite instinctive and can be reactive. So this square to Jupiter in Cancer is coming through as a challenge of boundaries, because Cancer is a sign of emotional boundaries. It's not like Capricorn's hard boundary. It's more shifting boundaries. It is cardinal water, so that is where the water begins at that boundary of the shoreline that is not so well defined. And Jupiter is expanding that. So it's like you're walking on the beach and you think you're just dipping your toes into the water, but before you know it, the tide has risen and you're now up to your waist in seawater. So this could be like a small direct comment from that Aries Mercury that turns into something bigger and is perceived as a personal attack or a heavy emotional experience. It could be a misunderstanding or perceiving something to be like deeply personal, maybe when it just wasn't meant to be that way, or it wasn't intended that way. That Aries energy wants to just move on and not get drawn into an emotional conversation about the past. And that Cancer energy wants to be validated and not brushed off. So there could be a tension with this square here. I would just be mindful this day that of your words and the impact that it might have on others. And conversely, possibly giving others the benefit of the doubt that maybe they don't necessarily mean something in the way that you are emotionally receiving it. So then we finish off this week with an air grand trine with Pluto at 5 degrees of Aquarius, Venus at 5 degrees of Gemini, and the moon at 5 degrees of Libra. And this feels like the ability to understand something on a deeper level through communication and connection with others. This is something transformative that happens through interacting with others. There is an ability to interact and communicate consciously here in a way where you're somewhat removed from the heaviness of the emotional, physical, and personal experience that we have with the other elements. This air grand trine is the ability to gain an objective insight into something. So it's a good time to communicate about difficult topics without becoming overly personal or defensive. This would be an energy that supports problem solving in a fair and harmonious way, and being able to see dynamics that were otherwise not available when you're too subjective in that experience. Well, that is all of the energies I will cover for this week. As mentioned, please check out the Sun Square Pluto Yin class if you would like to deepen your experience of that Sun Square Pluto energy and work with it this week. That is available through enchantedistrology.ca. And as always, thank you so much for joining me here today. I will be back next week with another episode.